Coochie tunnels, and I was leading a litter party in the terrible Minh Ton counter-ambush, passing North Vietnamese that were also bringing their wounded off the battlefield. Came back from Vietnam in '65 with a black lieutenant from my company. We went through Europe. We took the Air Force One around from Saigon to New Delhi, India, and to Afghanistan, and finally landed in Spain. He and I traveled to Europe up to Germany, and people confused us with the I Spy team, which had just opened that past year. Everywhere we went, people gawked. He was taller than I was. From that time in the Army, Vietnam, 65, 66, I got out, went back to school at the University of North Carolina, and married my wife of 48 years, Brenda, and was recruited by the Central Intelligence Agency into the paramilitary section. I went back to Southeast Asia then in 1971 as a paramilitary case officer, working up country in Laos in the secret war. When the ceasefire came in Laos, as it did in South Vietnam, I transferred over to South Vietnam and was assigned to the Delta. I was in Laos for 2 years, Brenda on the edge of the fighting with our 2 adopted kids. And in Vietnam, she was up in Taipei. I'll get in to see her every 6 weeks or so. I was there to the very end. I left 2 days after the embassy in Saigon was evacuated, making the dubious claim of being the last man out of Vietnam. We came back to the States. I continued in the clandestine corps, the DDO of the CIA, and we were assigned around the world. And I want to share some of those experiences with you. But before passing on, that your speakers on this tour came from North Carolina. I don't know how they came to go to that state to get their speakers. Brent and I are from the south eastern section of North Carolina. We come from small farming communities. On my mother's side were farmers and preachers. On my father's side were farmers and school teachers. So this is what you get. You get this guy that's been around. You also get a guy that was known in the CIA as the Mule. And that was certainly in some reference to my southern drawl. My stories, along the way, I have had some people take pictures. I know John collects friends wherever he goes, the speaker for this morning yesterday. I like stories. I like a good story. And one of the best stories, my stories I've collected in one of my books, all my stuff is going to be referenced. This is a book I put out of Country Homilies some years ago. One of my best, though, it was told to Brenda by a lady from her hometown in Sanford, North Carolina, Grace Reynolds. Grace said her aunt came up to her, her great aunt, and said, "Gracie, I want a gun." And Gracie said, "Annie, how come you want a gun?" She said, "It's all those Mexicans in the parking lot, those migrant workers. A lot of them don't speak English." She said, I'm just by myself. I come out with my groceries and my billfold Saturday afternoon after doing my shopping at Piggly Wiggly, and I'm just fearful of those people. I have to pass them by, and they stop talking as I get closer and start talking after I leave. She said, if they had a gun in my purse, I'd feel more comfortable about going shopping. And Gracie said, "I ain't going to give you no gun. You're 84 years old. You could drop your purse, that gun could go off, you could hurt somebody." But somebody else gave that woman a gun, and this is a true story. The Saturday before Thanksgiving, 1991, she came out of Piggly Wiggly on Horner Boulevard in Sanford, North Carolina, and looked at her car, and the worst thing she could possibly imagine was happening. There were 2 Mexican gentlemen sitting in her car. And people later told police she didn't hesitate a minute. Reached in her purse and got this great big old gun, and went walking up to the car, old skinny old woman, stuck that gun in the face of the guy behind the wheel and said, "I don't know if you speak English now, but I bet you understand this gun. You don't get out of my car right now, I'm going to shoot it." Those 2 guys got out the other side and took off running. She got in, her key wouldn't work. It wasn't her car. about that first tour up-country Laos when I worked in the CIA secret war. It's, they might call the Korean War the forgotten war. The CIA war in Laos is the unknown war. And I'd like to tell you about our activities there, what we did do and what we didn't do. And then I want to talk about my evacuation from Vietnam and how traumatic that was and how much was going on. It was the most chaotic, the most stressful, the most meaningful time in my life, the evacuation from Vietnam. But I also want to tell you about the CIA, and everybody has their own idea about the CIA. If you were to, somebody were to come and interview you, and you were to tell them everything you knew about the CIA, there would be 300 or 400 different reports. The CIA has to maintain the secrecy of its operations to be viable. You cannot be an intelligence operation and tell the opposition what you are doing, or you wouldn't be successful. So for that reason, there isn't much known about the CIA operations, and rightly so. And for you in the audience and me, since we are going to talk about CIA operations, they've agreed to switch the lights out and then speak in a whisper. I'm going to give you some background on the CIA, and then we're going to use Ron Kessler's book, Inside the CIA, as a reference. I'm not going to give you any classified information, of course, as we go through this. You can find everything that I'm going to tell you in the next 20 or 30 minutes from Kessler's book. Kessler pointed out that in 1929, Henry Stinson, Secretary of State, closed down the cryptoanalysis department of the State Department because he said, gentlemen don't read other gentlemen's mail. That was in 1929. And that thinking led us about 12 years later to be surprised by the Japanese, ungentlemanly Japanese attack on the Pacific Fleet in Pearl Harbor. OSS was created within 6 months, and it was only in operation for all of all this note about it. It was only in operation for 3 years, but it sent over 10,000 saboteurs and resistance fighters and arsonists and propagandists to help in the war effort, and they were very successful. They operated mostly in Europe and South Asia and in China, working with Chiang Kai-shek against the Japanese. They did not operate in the Pacific because MacArthur didn't want them there. He thought he could do the job of intelligence, military intelligence, with his own men, and he certainly didn't want another channel of communication back to Washington. In 1945, in August of 1945, when Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed, and the war, a couple of days later the war was over, they disbanded the OSS. Wild Bill Donovan, the driving force in its creation, was feared by a lot in Washington, including Hoover, who did not want to compete in intelligence guys on the top level in Washington. But also MacArthur and Marshall had their concerns about Donovan. It was dissolved. There were temporary office buildings next to the reflecting pool in the Lincoln Memorial in Washington. It was dissolved all except the branch that was just concerned with collecting intelligence and the branch that did counter-espionage. Those two branches of OSS were collected in the military called SSU. But in 1947, there was concern by policymakers and Washington security people who wanted the intelligence out of the military, and they wanted it run by civilians to tell the president what was happening rather than just to the military. And the CIA was created. And those two branches, the old OSS collection branch and the counter-espionage branch, were put into the new CIA in what they call OSO, Office of Special Operations. A year later, a fellow named George Kennan, who was a Soviet expert, went to Harry Truman and said, Harry, you just don't know the mischiefs the Soviets are up. And in every country, they look for seams, they look for divisions, the labor against the capitalists, the liberals against the conservatives, the Soviets do, and they try and drive a wedge in. They are very active out in the world with their propaganda and their just disturbance out on the social scene, the marketplace. And we need something to counter that. There's nothing in the government, there's nothing in the military that counters the Soviet efforts in 1948 to do this. So on Truman's authority, George Kennan formed the OPC, Office of Policy Coordination. And they were housed in the same buildings with the CIA, but their mission was, and it reads like something out of a spy novel, that the U.S. government was always to be in a position to deny their actions, but they were to go overseas and they were to counter the Soviets in as much as they could identify their work, and to do whatever work was in their power to recover some of the damage done by the Soviet revolutionaries around the world. In 1950, the intelligence was still very small. In 1950, that CIA organization only had 5,000 people. OPC, the counter to the Soviets, had 302. The military was down to 2 million. The top of the height of the Second World War, there were 8 million people in the U.S. military. In January of 1950, we were down to 2 million. And of that 2 million, there were very few combat arms. There were a lot of the infrastructure, soldiers maintaining the infrastructure of the Pentagon that was there. And it left the world bare. As the world was mending itself and getting back to its feet, there were opportunities for the Soviets to take advantage, and they did. June the 25th, 1950, on orders from Stalin, the North Koreans advanced across the 38th parallel and invaded South Korea. And they brought in 100,000 people. The South Koreans only had 90,000. Our U.S. military involvement had been very, very recent and very small. We only came in 1946 to establish the DMZ at the 38th parallel, and we withdrew almost all of our military down to 500 people by 1949. So the U.S. military was only there with 500 people when the Stalin saw the opportunity and had the North hit in these advance. So they pushed the South Koreans and the other forces that they could throw into the lurch there all the way down to the Pusan perimeter. It was up to MacArthur then to win Korea back, or to salvage as much as Korea as possible. And that brought about the entrance of Hans Toffel. I have my heroes in the CIA, and Hans is the first. So the OPC had only been around for a couple of years. He was one of those 302 people that were in it. He came over because MacArthur had his own ideas about the military, which didn't cover the whole spectrum. And the CIA was there to expand his look, the U.S. look, at what was happening, to give the policymakers a better idea about what to do, better options. He went in and he went toe-to-toe with MacArthur's G2, Charles Willoughby. We have any ex-military that go back to the Korean War? Ex-military Korean War? Charles Willoughby, sound familiar, the G2? He did not draw a breath that was not, he thought, in support of General MacArthur. He did not say anything from his G2 shop that did not support MacArthur's thinking. He underestimated the North Koreans. He downplayed the possibility of the North Korean invasion. And once they were there, he began to underplay or bring in his estimates to match what MacArthur wanted to do, which, as it turned out, was the invasion in Incheon, which cut off all those North Koreans who were in the south. Hans Toffel played a significant part in the Incheon invasion and helped that to be a success, although MacArthur got all the credit, and that was okay by Hans. Hans was an interesting guy. Born in Denmark, maybe Sweden, to a merchant family, As a young man, in his late teens, he had gone to China and had worked for China, Manchuria, North Korea, and beat in developing trade for this company that he worked for. So he spoke Chinese, he spoke a little bit of Korean. In the Second World War, he actually spoke 6 languages. He was very involved in OSS operations in Europe. And he was a success at every turn. He had good judgment, he was very aggressive, he was a good risk taker, and he made things happen that worked out well for the United States. And that speaks to his work against Charles Willoughby, MacArthur's G2 in Korea. And Hans Toffel put the CIA on the map. Now, after the Korean War, OPC was merged into the CIA. It was the best for command and control. So that job of OPC to counter Soviet aggression around the world became part of the CIA's charter. But Hans Toffel, the CIA had only 5,000 people in January of 1950. 1,000 ended up in Korea under Toffel's command. So he expanded our efforts there in Korea and eventually brought about an armistice in '53. Hans Toffel. You have a chance and you come across his name, give him a hand salute. He did a marvelous job, and he put the CIA on the map, and he showed policymakers in Washington how a civilian-run intelligence organization was good and could speak in their language, not necessarily military language that was filtered through the Pentagon. We went on. I joined the CIA in 1970. August the 2nd of 1970. So this was about 20 years after Hans. I think Hans had already left the service. You don't find many people who were in the clandestine core of the CIA to talk about it to audiences for several reasons. One is that if you were undercover during your CIA career, you retire undercover. So there are few people who can go out and say, I was CIA. I petitioned to come out from underneath cover when I retired because I wanted to write some books. And security and the CIA chewed their bottom lip and looked up at the ceiling and hewed and hawed and finally agreed that I could come out of the CIA. So there's a very small number of people who actually come out. And there is the thought, and another one of my heroes is a guy named Howard Bain. At every one of your tables at night, you would want Howard Bain sitting there to talk to him. He was a good listener. I know John talks about the importance of listening. But you better be careful around Howard Bain because he will remember everything you say. But he wasn't ill-mannered, but he was a very smart guy. He could talk about modern theology. He could talk about the way man has come to govern himself. He could talk about intelligence with the same ease that he could talk about clandestine tradecraft and meeting and recruiting agents around the world. But he had a wonderful smile about him. And Howard Bain always said, and I worked with him after 9/11. We were called back to teach tradecraft to new hires. Howard Bain would always tell the new hires, you don't join this organization. You don't do this work for fame and fortune. If you do, you're in the wrong business. If you do, you will not be satisfied, and you will not give the agency the full service it's due. We believe in its mission of maintaining a watchful presence overseas, but we don't do it to get recognized for what we've done, and we don't do it for money. And that still prevails. I have written some books, and I've got into this public speaking about things I did in the agency in sort of a small way initially. But I have found in the questions that are asked that there is enormous misinformation out there when it comes to this very vital and still very effective part of our government. People just don't know the CIA. It's this mystery organization. Another thing about your questions, I'm sure you're going to have questions over, we're going to be together 6 times if you choose to come back. I'll be here 6 times. If you have questions, stop me. As you see my wife and I out on the ship. Or the last day. Collect your questions and ask them then. The last day, or maybe Royal Caribbean will give us some extra time that I can answer your question to the extent I can. I'm not going to go into classifying information, but I can tell you how the agency operates. The agency that I joined follows this plumbing chart, this schematic. But it's not, the agency I joined is not this confusing. Look at the very top and you see the director of the CIA. Take that and come down to the 4 blocks at the bottom. The others are sort of, bureaucrats and lawyers and that kind of thing. But the operating, it's a 4-cylinder engine, the CIA, and the director is the driver. I have, the first director was Helms. My favorite guy was Casey. Casey, we just loved. There was some I didn't like. There was some I think that missed the mission, and that was George Tenet. I think George Tenet threw in with Bush when it came to South Asia, and he gave intelligence like Willoughby to MacArthur that went along with what Bush was thinking, rather than stand aside. And Helms was known for that. He would not even get into small chit-chat, any social chit-chat. He maintained his distance and his opinions, and he would speak from facts. I mean, he let the facts speak for himself. He did not consider his audience, but it had to be a high-level audience. But if it was the president or it was a general at the Pentagon, Helms spoke the truth, and he let the facts speak for themselves. The very first directorate on your left is the DDA, Deputy Directorate for Administration. And they buy the computers, and they buy the cars, and the security is there, and some training elements. Bookkeeping is there. DDA is sort of the housekeepers. But they gave me my 15 minutes of fame. And if you allow me, I'll tell you the story about my 15 minutes of fame. If you're back at Langley and you have to go out on CIA business around town, you'll call the dispatcher. Now, there's some places that the CIA goes when they leave campus that have a regular bus shuttle. You can probably imagine which ones they are. There are others that are sort of isolated, and you have to be careful about the way you go. There are some places that you go, you always take a sedan. If you go to Capitol Hill, you're going to take a sedan. If you go to the White House or the old executive office buildings, you're going to take a sedan. Well, I was about 6 years in the agency. I was equivalent to maybe a major. And I was asked to go to the White House, not to brief, but to be there during a briefing in case questions came up about this one operation. So you got it? I'm not even going as a briefer. I'm going as a guy standing in the corner. And it was going to be in that famous room where you remember Obama and Hillary Clinton when we were watching the takedown of Osama bin Laden. It was going to be in that room where I was going to be this fly on the wall. Call them and they could shut up unless you're asked, unless you're spoken to. But now the trick in taking a sedan, I had to take sedans several times in the old executive building, is you don't want to be there last. And this is inside knowledge. If you have your son going off or your grandson, CIA, tell him if he's going to take a sedan, get there early. Because you get there early, you can get a seat in the back. What you don't want to be is to be the last and have to sit between the driver and the guy sitting on shotgun, because your feet or your knees are up in your chest. And it's very undignified, because you always carry a briefcase, right? Sit with a briefcase in your lap and your knees up to your chin going downtown Washington. Just no, there's no status in it. So this time I had to go to be a fly on the wall, to be just that briefing in case there was any questions on the CIA. And I arrived early. And there was a brand new DDA driver. And he had on the livery, the chauffeur livery with that hat and the jacket and the pants. And I got in the back because I was early. There was nobody else there. And you know what he did? He got around and got in behind the wheel. I'm the only one going down to the White House in a sedan, a black sedan. If I had a cell phone, I would have called my wife. I would have stopped people on the street and said, "Look at me." And we pulled in for me to give this briefing. Now, you see the White House there, and there's Treasury, there's the old executive office building. We pulled in there, and we parked. And he was a chatty guy. This was his first week or first 2 weeks or so. I'm sitting in the back. For all the world, imagine what people were thinking as I drove by. To be parked there, and he got out to open my door. I am just a major in rank. When right behind me pulled two State Department, and then a Pentagon minivans, and those people filed out. Well, has anybody ever been to the White House tour the White House?
Okay.
You know what's lined up along this line right there? People waiting to get in, right? It's just a whole line of civilians. And what do they all have? Cameras. Who is getting out of the sedan? Followed by all these hotty-totties from State Department and DOD, pulled in behind. Who do they just know is the boss? But I knew a lot of the other guys, so I'm calling out to them, and we're walking up, and I'm on the far left. And all these people, dozens and dozens, maybe 100 people, maybe it took 7.5 minutes to walk up to the gate, take a picture, and you'd hear them say as we walk by, look at that guy. And I'm wearing the best suit. Brenda dressed me just as good as she could. I looked as good as I've ever looked in my life. And all those other guys were there. And I got into that. Not only that, friends, that's the damn waited for. And I got the same treatment coming back out. The guy opened the door for me. They got in their van, and I got in my sedan. Like 15 minutes away, DDA. Second director is the DDS&T, Deputy Director for Science and Technology. And they do very high-end technical collection of intelligence. They did the U-2s, they did the drones. They started the drone program with the Air Force, working in partnership with the Air Force to develop the drones. The Air Force soon began to lose interest. Why? Because the Air Force hierarchy is made up of fighter pilots, and we were trying to introduce robots to do their job. So they began to fall back and lag back, and pretty soon we were moving ahead with the drone program, and Air Force said, "We'll see you." Well, then we started arming those drones, and we found that we could be very effective. That brought up another problem. If we armed the drones, if the CIA drove those drones by remote control and fired those guns, didn't that make us assassins? And the CIA simply does not work like that anymore. We might have done it when I first joined the agency, but in very short order we stopped that. And you, as American citizens, probably won't that. I, being inside, won't that. I want somebody else to have that responsibility. So I think George Tenet was the DDO, was the DCI at the time. And he told the White House, "We are not in that business. We cannot pull the trigger." And that responsibility then went to the National Security Council. And it seems to be a situation that works. When our drones, with our intelligence, if we locate somebody, if they are armed, then the National Security Council can pull the trigger. And the agency does it. I'll give you another more recent case about the assassination, why we don't do that. I was called back, I retired in 1992, was called back in 2001 because of 9/11. They called some of us old case officers back. And in 2003, I was deployed to the Far East because of the Bali bombing of 2002. And if you don't remember that, we were still in shock with our 9/11. Is that in the summer of 2002, the video recorder in this bar shows a guy walking in with a suitcase and setting it down, and surprisingly, not a suitcase, a briefcase. And surprisingly, he didn't look out of place. And he set it down near the dance floor, and he walked away. And then a few minutes later, it blew up. Killed a couple of people on the dance floor. A couple of people were killed. They were stomped on and killed as the people were fleeing the nightclub. They dispersed. There were bars on either side of this nightclub that happened. And there was sort of a wave effect. Everybody moved away, and then there was sort of a coming back in together of all these people. And they had parked a dump truck full of fertilizer and diesel oil. And when all the crowd came back in, crowded around that diesel truck, looking at the bar, they detonated, killed 112 people. Mostly Australians, some Japanese, some other nationality, and some Americans. Now this was sort of oddly placed in that Bali is a Hindu island, Indonesia is a Muslim country. But they were very helpful in Jakarta about finding the people who had done this. Because Bali for them is a cash cow. They need the money that Bali brings in. They didn't want its reputation completely sold. And they found everybody except the '1 guy. His name was Bali. Everybody they found. And they had gotten from them a pretty good story. And Bali had, he'd become radicalized. He went to Pakistan. He worked with Osama bin Laden's forces. He learned how to make bombs. He got some money. He came back. He put the plan together, and he executed it. Everybody picked up except Bali. Disappeared. So I went over and part of a group, and we were going to try and find Bali. Not we were going to. It wasn't that we started. That effort began the second day. The CIA was involved in trying to find out who was behind this. Because it's a reflection on us, too. We're at war. We're not really sure the extent of the war in 2002, but we know we're in a pretty pitched battle with these radicalized Muslims. I was in one country, and I sent out a picture. We only had one picture of the guy. So I sent out this picture to this one area. It was an area where he might have been, and sure enough, someone said, I recognize that guy, he was here recently. So by the time the word got back to me that he was there for sure, and I sent that great cable back to Washington, got him, found him, he's here. He also got the word and split. So I had to send another bad cable back saying, no, he's gone. But we found him in a neighboring country. Very soon thereafter, we located him. And we got American eyes on him. We were watching him. He was sitting at the top of the guest house, and he would come down occasionally and go to a computer cafe, a Wi-Fi cafe. And he would come back, and he was staying with one of his lieutenants who would go out and get their meals. So what do you do with it? Seriously, what do you do with it? You got to make the decision. What do you do with it? What? You would want to say, well, just shoot the son of a bitch. His hands are bloody with American bloods, but we don't do that anymore. We couldn't turn him over to the Indonesians because they would just lock him up and maybe he'd be a hero. Australians didn't want anything to do with it. Japanese didn't want it. And the country where he was, they absolutely wanted him to go away. So we came up with two plans. And the first plan was to put a Volkswagen bus beside the sidewalk and have one of our big guys over here. And when he walked along making his trip to the Wi-Fi cafe, turn around and knock him into the bus and drive off with him. But we were going to arrest him. We were going to take him off the streets. I mean, he couldn't get away. But he stopped going to the cafe. So we finally went in and got the manager of that bed and breakfast of that house to call him down, and he had a message. And when he came down, there were about 6 guys that were on top of him. Where is he now? Guantanamo. So he's one of our special people there. And the last indirect contact I knew of him was about 8 years ago, and he had no regrets. He's still very proud of what he did. So that's going into sort of the deep, dark recesses of the agency. But some things that we do, but now in the open society that we live in, there's some things we don't do wet work anymore. We just don't eliminate people. We come up with other options, or we leave it undone. We don't change governments anymore in a way that we might have done in our past. But anyway, that's the DDS&T, and they do very high-end technical collection. They also did the Glomar Explorer. We have any? Is that submariner in here, Captain? Anybody know about the Glomar Explorer?
Yeah, I do.
Well,
Glomar Explorer was built to recover part of a Russian submarine.
absolutely.
They tried to capture some of the missiles that were in there.
Absolutely. There's a great book out on this underwater war that's going on. And DDS&T was listening in the Pacific. I don't know what they were listening. I think it must have been a boondoggle to get them out of Langley. But they had some new stuff, and they were listening in the Pacific. And they heard the explosion inside of a Soviet submarine. And they knew where it went down. And it was one of those run silent, run deep. I think they assumed. They didn't know for sure. They hoped maybe that's what it was. And we just kept monitoring it. The CIA did. They didn't want to go and muddy the water. And pretty soon out of Vladivostok, that's the major Soviet port on the Pacific, their whole fleet came out. Rowboats, sailboats, tugboats, people in inner tubes. And we sort of tracked where they went. And you could see where the submarine must have gone and come back because they were looking for it. And our U.S. Navy, this is in the late 60s, our U.S. Navy was going crazy. Back to Washington. You got the Navy fleet between us and California. They're in all of our sea routes. Has it got something to do with Vietnam? Are they going to attack us here? And we had told, I think the biggest list was something like a dozen at one time, outside of DDS&T, about that submarine. But that included the Navy. And we wanted Hawaii to be excited. We wanted the Navy in Hawaii to really be afraid, because if they were calm, the Russians would say, ha-ha, they know. If we could get to that Soviet submarine and get to their code book, it would change everything. Plus, if we could get to their missiles, we didn't know the capability of their missiles that were going up and down our west coast. Could they hit Las Vegas? I don't know, that's what we did. Could they hit Denver, St. Louis? So getting to that submarine without the Soviets knowing that we got there was worth a lot. And pretty soon they went back. So they turned to the CIA, they being the National Security Advisor or whatever, and said, go get it. So we went to Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes fronted building this great big Glomar Explorer that, there it is. He did it from scratch. And it opened up at the bottom. I don't know if this is true depiction. It's not what I remember. But it opened on the bottom, like a spaceship will open up at the top. And these claws would go down. And a good friend of my wife, where's my wife? What is the same word? Yeah, my wife. One of our good friends, he was, it's a long story, and I'm even now running out of time. But he was on one of the crews. When the agency had had work to do up in northern Laos, working with the Hmong against the North Vietnamese. They were working with Hill's tribe, who were Stone Age, who had not, didn't know the internal combustion engine, who had never seen electricity. These were the people we were working with to fight the North Koreans, the North Vietnamese. Who did the agency go to hire people to do this job? They went and got smoke jumpers out of Montana, and as it turned out, they were perfect. Who did they go to get to crew these Glomar Explorer? They went and got Cajun shrimpers. So there were 2 full crews, and our friend John. And sometimes somebody asked me about the trouble I got in with Miss Brenda over there when John and I got back together. But John was on the crew that recovered it. And that, when I asked him, well, what did you get? The reports was that as he pulled it out, some of it dropped off. He said, I can't tell you. And he never did. I'm his buddy, and he wouldn't tell me what happened. DDS&T. The DDI is the Deputy Directorate for Intelligence, and that's where the analysts work. They analyze both overt and covert information. They get their overt information from the open source division, which is in their directorate. And it's staffed with hundreds and hundreds of people who are born overseas, a lot of them academicians, some of them journalists, who listen to every TV program, every news program around the world. And they claim to read every newspaper around the world. So every day, the DDI gets overt information. But some of these totalitarian countries, like China, for example, what they say on the news is sort of the government policy. And it's what we do, what the DDI does. Takes that report and they squeeze it and they squeeze it and they squeeze it and they get it down to information that helps them understand the covert part of the business. They also get from NSA and from satellites, and then from their brother organization they get information from agents. HUMINT is human intelligence. HUMINT, space information, and then NSA information. And then there are other types of information they get. They bring it all together. That's where the central really takes on meaning of the CIA in the DDI. They bring all that information in together and they come out with conclusions. They don't bring it all together and then publish it and hope people read it. They bring it all together. Sometimes the president will ask, well, what's going to be the consequence? If this happens and that happens, what's going to happen here? And they can give them an answer. And now, is it the right answer? No, but you can bet it's about the best answer that the U.S. can get. I'm a big fan of the DDI. The real studs in DDI were the guy who put out the President's Daily Brief. And it used to be one piece of paper. And that staff would come in early evening. They would come in after we would be off work. And they would work all night. They had access to everything the CIA had. Everything across the board. So when the president woke up in the morning, that guy was sitting outside his bedroom door in a briefcase with his own newspaper. And it had wide margins. The president wanted more information. He would write and give me more about this, not sure what this means, what happens if this happens. And that guy would put it back in his briefcase and he would take it back and the president would have an answer the next day. Now that President's Daily Brief, I think, goes out to more than just the president. Probably the Speaker of the House gets one, Vice President, National Security Council. My guess is maybe 6 or 7 people get a copy of the President's Daily Brief. But it's a good, and our president chooses to get it by secure iPad. I emphasize secure. But in the morning he wakes up, he gets his iPad, and there's the information. With the most important information to the staff on the very top. They are still the heroes. And the DDI, the people who work on the President's Daily Brief. Now here's the thing about the DDI people. And this is some more insider information that you can use if you deal with CIA people. They have this enhanced cognitive ability of bringing on information and storing it in the back of their mind. And when they need that information, however minute it is, they can go get it and they compare it with different other information. They go to the back of their head and they bring out. Or they'll bring out 2 or 3 pieces of this stuff they've remembered. And they'll be reading something, they'll blend all that in together. What I mean to say with all this, if you were at a party and Jeopardy comes on, and you're sitting next to a DDI person, do not try and answer the questions on Jeopardy, because the DDI person is going to embarrass you. You're going to leave crying. You might get the first 1 or 2 Jeopardy questions, but they will know them all. They have that enhanced ability to analyze. And then the 4th directive. Now, when I joined in 1970, it had area divisions. EUR was Europe. FE was Far East. LA, Latin America. AF, Africa. And they had 2 or 3 staffs. Anybody know this gentleman? Jim Angleton. He had the counter-espionage staff that goes all the way back to OSS. And again, he is one of my heroes. He gave himself up. I think the agency used him up. Very smart guy. But after a while, he became a little paranoid because he saw spies behind every plant that we had in the agency. Then we had the paramilitary branch, SOG, and that's where I was hired. And this is what one of your old gunslingers looks like. That's me in Afghanistan in 2010. But other than Angleton's counter-espionage and my paramilitary, the rest of the clandestine service was area divisions. I'm going to be here for about 6 days running. I'm not going to be able to finish today as I discuss the agency, but I'll pick up tomorrow. So if I suddenly stop because Royal Caribbean said, you stop, maybe they turn off the microphone. But we'll pick out tomorrow if you'll come back in here, if you're interested.
He's not stopping yet.
We're still out for 4 minutes. The area divisions, you're trained at the farm, which is South Virginia, and it's about 3 months, and it's tough. It is a tough of training. You got to have some talent. Somebody in the recruitment center, somebody in the recruitment process has got to be good, because not everybody can do that kind of work. You have to do a lot of writing at the farm and doing that kind of stuff. But when you're graduated, there will be people out trying to get you to come to their area division. In the CIA, our job, our mission, we claim this core. Covert options aside, our mission is to maintain a watchful presence overseas. You know, you can write that down, and I'll tell you that's the mission that we were told when we first started our training, and that's the mission still today, to maintain a watchful presence overseas. The president, when he sits in the Oval Office, what does he know about what's going on in the world? He doesn't know. He can listen to the news, and they usually have a point of view they're trying to sell. CIA is his newspaper. We don't spy, we don't go gathering information we think he might need. Every station overseas, and we have CIA stations in some countries, not in most of the countries. We have it in countries that impact our security. We may have a station. And that station chief will have what is called an OD. And remember my book about Kessler, Ron Kessler? He goes into some detail about the OD. It's operating directive. That chief of station has a list of 5 or 6 or 7 key intelligence questions he's supposed to answer. 2 more minutes. That he's supposed to be answered, and that will be the yardstick that he's going to be judged on when he finishes his time. How well did he answer those questions? So your case officers going overseas has 3 jobs. These case officers that have come from the farm, that there's bartering back and forth. I'm sure there's backroom deal, you know. I'll give you Smith and Jones, but you have to give me Thomas over here, as these area divisions get their people. Having an area knowledge, a language from that area is also very helpful. But they're brought into the division, you sit on the desk for a year or 2, and then you go out to the field. You have 3 jobs. A case officer has 3 jobs. First job is maintain your cover. You lose your cover, you have to go home. If people know you work for the CIA, you have to come home. You put your family in jeopardy, and your job is no longer viable. Who can believe, if you are known to be CIA and somebody comes up and volunteers their service, how true of a bona fides is that? It's not. So you lose your cover, you have to come home. Job 1, maintain your cover. And that's usually your day job. Your CIA work, most of it, you do at night. 2 jobs, 1 paycheck. And then you want to live a life. You want to have your own life. And that's it. That's it for today. Tomorrow we'll pick up on job